Spend a few minutes talking about the bill that we're going to be voting on this afternoon. I'm in my 10th year, starting my 10th year in the Senate. And during that period of time, my number one goal in coming to the Senate was try to righten our financial ship. And almost everything that I've done in the Senate has been related to the fiscal consequences of our dereliction of duty as members of Congress of both parties. There's nothing partisan about that statement. We've seen different presidents and different parties control both bodies, always to the same result. And we have before us a bill today that is a purported compromise. I don't want to describe who it's a compromise for. It's a compromise for the politicians. It's not a compromise for the American people. Because what it really does is increase spending and increase taxes. And the net effect, even if you take all the budget gimmicks that are in this bill, that are not actual savings, and even if you believe people 10 and 11 years from now will actually hold their true to what this bill pretends to have us do, which we're not doing, something we did 2 years ago through this bill, we're still going to spend more money than we would have. And we're going to charge people revenues, $28 billion, pardon me, in increased revenues, which we're not calling tax increases, but Americans are going to pay that. So it's money that's going to come out of their pocket. So what we have before us is a bill that's a political compromise for the parties in Washington to keep us from doing what we really need to do. The hard things. And I'm going to go through some criticisms of this bill. It's not meant to be reflected on any one individual, and it'll apply just as much to the Republicans as it does the Democrats. But we have a bill that supposedly fixes things until past the next election. So we don't have to face these gigantic problems of, quote, deadlock. The other thing that I would note as I go through this is it's my contention that we don't have a problem getting along. It's my contention that we get along way too well. We get along way too well, otherwise we wouldn't have a $17.7 trillion debt. We wouldn't have $124 trillion in unfunded liabilities, and we wouldn't have debt per person in this country, which is now at $57,000 per person, and unfunded liabilities that's over $1 million per household, not including that debt repayment. Now, how did we do that? We had to agree to do that. Both parties had to agree to do that. The president had to sign it. So my contention is we get along way too well when it comes to ruining the financial future of our country. And my main criticism, I don't criticize compromise. I criticize compromise that ignores the facts of our financial situation. And I just want to make a point. I put a book out yesterday. It's called the Yearly Waste Book. I do it every year. I do it somewhat in jest, but to make a very real point. I outlined over $31 billion, what I think, and I think most Democrats would agree that the American public, 95% of them would agree with us, that when you're running a $700 billion deficit, maybe we shouldn't be spending these monies on these things, which goes far further in actually solving our problems for compromise in terms of creating a solution to the long-term problems and giving the American people what they really want. I mean, we really do have a 6% approval rating, right? I mean, that's true. I think we've earned it. And this bill, I believe, proves it. Because we did exactly the opposite of what the American people would like to see us do. We solved our problem as politicians, but we made their problem worse. And we didn't fix the things that are obvious to fix. I was on the Simpson-Bowles Commission. I was a member of the Gang of Six. I have worked in a bipartisan fashion with anybody that'll work on me to try to solve the big problems in front of our country. Except we as a body in the House don't really want to solve them. Because the thing you put at risk when you really solve them is political careers. And as a group of politicians, the people in Washington care much more about their careers, by their actions, it is proven, than they do about the long-term fiscal health of this country. And that applies to both parties. So when we have a deal brought before us that will avoid confrontation come January 15th, and we have all sorts of budget gimmicks in it that are not truthful, they're not real, in the hopes that somebody will grow a backbone 9 and 10 years from now and actually keep their word to the American public. And we're demonstrating right now we can't even keep our word 2 years from 2 years ago. Why would we be proud to vote for that? Does it solve a real problem? No. It puts a real problem off and actually makes the problems worse to the tune of $68 billion. So through this bill, we will borrow an additional $68 billion, 48 of it in the or 50 of it, close to, in the next year, and 20 some after that, in the year after, and then hope and pray that Congresses that follow us will do what we suggested. And everybody in this body knows that isn't going to happen. So when you vote on this bill, you're voting for your political career, you're voting for the Washington establishment, but you're not voting for the person out there that now has $57,000 worth of debt they're servicing, and their family of $1 million per household in this country in unfunded liabilities. So it'll pass. I have no doubt it'll pass. I feel like John the Baptist in the wilderness. But mark my words, if we continue to do what we're doing today, we will be remembered as the people who could have fixed the problem and didn't, who could have made the courageous decisions and chose not to, who could have stiffened their spines and said, we don't care what Republican extremists or liberal extremists say, the future of our country is more important than any political career in this town. And what we have before us is just the opposite of that. Just the opposite. And why wouldn't, in part of this agreement, some of the $250 billion that GAO has identified in waste, fraud, duplication, and mismanagement? There's not one thing in this bill that addresses one thing that GAO has recommended to Congress over the last 3 years. Not one. And so we have the waste book. $31 billion of what I would consider, and it's not partisan. There could be a difference in terms of agreement about what is important and what's not. But again, I would say, in terms of the waste book, should we be spending money now when we're borrowing money in light of the fiscal situation that we have on some of the things that we outline? It's a listing of 100 things. It's got $31 billion worth of savings, and I'll just outline a few of them for you. We're going to be taking up NDAA next. None of the amendments that I offered are in the NDAA. Every one of them were structural to the Pentagon to make it more responsible and accountable to its constitutional duty, which it has not performed, of giving account to Congress on how it spent its money. For example, the Army commissioned a contract to have a warfare overseeing blimp. They spent $297 million on that blimp. It flew for a short period of time in this country. We sold it back to the contractor for $300,000. And I have two questions. One, whoever signed that contract and made that decision, did they get fired from the federal government? Did they get demoted in rank? And number two, was the contract actually executed to the requirements that the military set out for it? It's called accountability. The answer to both of those is no. There is no accountability. And so we're going to have an NDAA bill come through that requires them to meet an audit. They've been being required since 1992 to meet an audit. They've not done it. They won't do it in 14, they won't do it in 17, and they're not going to do it in 18. Because there's no hammer on the Pentagon to make them do it. Because all hammers have been taken out. Because we don't want to force them to meet their constitutional responsibility. It's too hard. Well, we never told them it was too hard to go to Iraq or Afghanistan, but it's too hard for them to follow their constitutional duty to report on how they spend their money. And what I would put before you is if you can't measure what you're doing, you can't manage what you're doing. And it's obvious from the waste, fraud, and abuse, contract failures within the Pentagon, is they have no clue on what they're doing. All you have to do is take the Dwight D. Eisenhower carrier, the littoral combat ships, the F-35. All of those major defense programs are at risk, over budget, behind schedule, and I'm not talking a little bit over budget. So we didn't do the oversight. We haven't forced that. You'll never get control of those programs till you make them be able to account for what they're doing. My first training, my first degree is in accounting. I understand. The reason accounting is important is because it tells you where to go to manage your problems. The Pentagon cannot do that. The Pentagon ordered, at the insistence of us, by the way, some airplanes for Afghanistan. Guess what we've done? We've taken delivery here, and we've sent them straight to the Arizona desert. Just $422 million worth of them. And oh, by the way, the ones that we did go to Afghanistan, we're going to cut up, destroy. We're not going to send them to Africa for relief missions. We're not going to send them somewhere else. We're going to cut them into pieces. Another $200 million worth of airplane. And oh, by the way, because the Afghan Air Force wants the same thing America has, we've already given them 2 C-130Hs, and we're going to give them 2 more. That's another $400 million. So what we've done through poor management is waste almost $700 million on one item. There's nothing in this bill that corrects that. And yet this bill is going to come to the floor, the NDAA, and not one of us who actually knows what really needs to be done in terms of changing the financial picture in the Pentagon is going to have an opportunity to influence that bill. Not one of us. Didn't have to be that way. That bill came out of committee in May of last year. But we've chosen to operate that way. The person who ordered Camp Leatherneck in Afghanistan, a $34 million new camp for troops, sits abandoned today. Never occupied. Who was the general or the colonel that authorized that in anticipation of our drawdown, executed its building, and then ordered that we abandon it? Is there any accountability in the Pentagon or any other agency? Are we doing our job holding them accountable? The waste book isn't all about the Defense Department, but I brought a couple of those up just so we could see. The waste book's about all across the agencies, about poor judgment. You may disagree with me of some of the things in the waste book, but the question you have to ask yourself is, at a time when we've done what we've done to the American people in terms of unfunded liabilities, in terms of individual debt, average family now has over $220,000 of debt they have to pay back that we've borrowed. At a time when we do it, should we spend money the way we spend it? $978,000 to study romance novels. Now, certainly that's a priority right now in our government. Everybody would agree with that, right? Sure they are. They'd agree with it. And yet, we put out that contract last year and spent that money. to study the backgrounds and romance novels, both on the web and off, and why people write them. And we didn't just study it here, we studied it everywhere. Here's another one. How about $400,000 to Yale University by the National Science Foundation to actually study whether people who align with the Tea Party have the cognitive capability in terms of science? Well, guess what? We spent that money, and the professor got the biggest surprise of his life. Here's what the study says, is people who are aligned with the Tea Party have far exceptional cognitive abilities when it comes to science, math, and financial aptitude. Totally surprised the professor, because the whole purpose was to undermine people who are constitutional conservatives. Yet we've spent $400,000 on doing that. That's just a few of the small examples of silliness that goes on. And everybody said, well, $400,000 isn't much, $900,000 isn't much. State Department spent $5 million the last week of the fiscal year. What'd they spend it on? Anybody know? To buy all brand new crystal stemware for all the embassies throughout the world. We didn't need new stemware, but we had to spend the money, so we spent it. I mean, just think about that. We're responsible for that. We allow it to happen. There's no oversight here. There's no aggressiveness in terms of controlling the cost, and our default position is the agreement of this budget bill that doesn't address any of those problems. The American people are going to be asking questions about why we get along so well. It's not the political story that Washington spins out of conflict and partisan bickering, because the facts don't lie. We get along way too well. And we're going to get along so well, we're going to pass another bill that solves the problem for us as politicians, but in fact actually hurts the American people. I'm not going to be a part of that. And I'm going to keep yelling from the canyons and from the mountaintops that until we start doing what we're supposed to do, this isn't going to change. It'd be my hope that some of us would wake up and start looking at some of the real facts. $30 billion would have made a big difference if you just eliminate the things in this book for next year. You'd have taken care of 1/3 of the sequester. And this is just 100. I can give you 300. I can give you $150 billion worth of stupidity every year. But we choose not to do it. And we choose not to do it because you have to be a committee chairman to hold an oversight to dig into this stuff. You actually have to do the hard work to find out where the administration is spending money. President Obama doesn't want this money wasted this way. He needs our help. And yet we won't help him. We won't help the American people. So consequently, the future of our country is at risk when it should be gloriously great. And it's at risk not because of the American people. It's at risk because of us. We ought to change that. I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.